The screams from the warehouse cut through the night like broken glass. Marcus Chen pressed his back against the rusted metal wall, his special forces training kicking in as he counted the voices inside. 3 guards, maybe 4. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. Somewhere in that hellhole was 8-year-old Tyler Morrison, the son of the most powerful CEO in Seattle, and Marcus had exactly 17 minutes before the traffickers moved him to their next location. The police were still 40 minutes out, stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare of jurisdictional disputes and warrant paperwork. 40 minutes Tyler didn't have. Marcus closed his eyes for just a second, letting his military instincts take over. He'd done extractions in Afghanistan, pulled soldiers from enemy compounds in the dead of night. But this felt different. This was personal in a way that made his chest tight, with something he hadn't felt since his own son David had been kidnapped by his ex-wife 3 years ago. That custody battle had cost him everything: his savings, his security clearance, and eventually his career in special operations. Now he worked night security at Morrison Industries, invisible to the executives who rushed past his desk every morning, just another minimum wage guard in a cheap uniform. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was the only thing standing between an innocent child and a fate worse than death. The irony wasn't lost on him. Victoria Morrison, the ice-cold CEO who'd never acknowledged his existence despite walking past his security station for 2 years, was about to discover that the man she'd overlooked was the only one capable of bringing her son home alive. Marcus checked his watch again. 16 minutes. The kidnappers had grabbed Tyler from his elite private school that afternoon, a precision operation that spoke of inside knowledge and careful planning. The ransom demand wasn't money. It was Morrison Industries' revolutionary encryption software that the company had developed for the Department of Defense. Software that in the wrong hands could compromise national security and put countless lives at risk. The warehouse district stretched out before him like a maze of shadows and broken dreams. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where CEOs' sons were supposed to end up, but it was exactly the kind of place where men like Marcus had learned to hunt. His fingers found the tactical knife at his belt, a reminder of who he used to be before the world had stripped away everything that mattered. Tonight, he was about to remember. The first time Marcus Chen noticed Tyler Morrison, the boy was sitting alone in the marble lobby of Morrison Industries at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, his small legs swinging from an oversized leather chair, while his mother finished yet another emergency board meeting 30 floors above. Marcus had been working security at the tech giant's Seattle headquarters for 8 months, and he'd developed a routine that kept him invisible to the executives who treated him like furniture. But something about the kid's hollow expression reminded him too much of his own son David during those final months before the custody battle tore their family apart. Tyler couldn't have been more than 8 years old, dressed in the kind of expensive private school uniform that cost more than Marcus made in a week. But money couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes, or the way he flinched every time the elevator chimed, hoping it might finally be his mother coming to take him home. Marcus had seen that same desperate hope in David's face during those awkward supervised visits, when every goodbye felt like another small death. The Morrison Industries building was a testament to success and ambition, all gleaming steel and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Elliott Bay. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. At night, when the corporate warriors finally retreated to their suburban fortresses, the building transformed into something quieter, more honest. That's when Marcus could do his job without the constant reminder of how far he'd fallen, from his days as a special operations sergeant to a night security guard earning $12 an hour. He'd lost everything in the divorce, not just his marriage but his security clearance, his military career, and worst of all, his son. Jennifer had played the system perfectly, painting him as an unstable veteran with anger issues, while her lawyer father pulled strings to ensure she got full custody. The fact that Marcus had never raised his voice, never touched a drink, never shown anything but love and patience with David hadn't mattered. What mattered was that Jennifer's family had money and connections, while Marcus had nothing but a service record that suddenly seemed worthless in family court. The night security job at Morrison Industries was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while he figured out his next move. But months had turned into years, and Marcus had gradually accepted that this was his life now. He walked the empty halls, checked locked doors, and tried not to think about the fact that he was using the same tactical awareness skills that had once saved lives in combat zones to make sure office supplies weren't being stolen. Victoria Morrison was everything Marcus expected from a Fortune 500 CEO, brilliant, ruthless, and completely absorbed in building her empire. She'd taken over Morrison Industries from her father 5 years earlier and had tripled the company's value through a combination of innovative technology development and aggressive market expansion. She was the kind of woman who commanded rooms full of powerful men, who made decisions that affected thousands of jobs, and who apparently had very little time for the small boy who waited for her in the lobby night after night. Marcus told himself it wasn't his business. Tyler Morrison wasn't his son, and the kid's family problems weren't his responsibility. But every night, watching the boy sit alone with his homework spread across the coffee table, Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had watching David withdraw deeper into himself during those final months, when his own son had stopped believing that Daddy would always be there to protect him. The first time Marcus intervened, it wasn't planned. Tyler had been in the lobby for 3 hours, his homework long finished, when he started showing signs that Marcus recognized from his military days. The rapid breathing, the pale complexion, the way his small hands gripped the chair arms like he was trying to anchor himself to reality. The kid was having a panic attack, and the handful of late-working executives who passed through the lobby either didn't notice or didn't care. Marcus abandoned his security desk without a second thought, crossing the marble expanse with the same measured pace he'd once used to approach wounded soldiers in hostile territory. He knelt beside Tyler's chair, his voice deliberately calm and steady. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Marcus. I work security here. Can you tell me your name?" Tyler's eyes were wide with fear, but he managed to whisper his response. Marcus had dealt with panic attacks before, soldiers coming down from adrenaline rushes, civilians caught in crossfire. The techniques were the same regardless of age. He guided Tyler through breathing exercises, using a trick he'd learned from a Navy SEAL medic about focusing on external sounds. Within 10 minutes, the boy's breathing had returned to normal, though the exhaustion that followed was clearly visible. "Better?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside Tyler. The boy nodded, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his expensive blazer. "This happen often?" Tyler shrugged, the universal gesture of a child who'd learned not to expect adult problems to be fixable. "Sometimes. When I get scared that Mom's forgotten about me again." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. How many nights had David said something similar during those final months, when work stress and marital problems had consumed Marcus's attention? How many times had his own son felt forgotten while Marcus was deployed overseas, missing birthdays and school plays and bedtime stories? "Your mom didn't forget," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Sometimes grown-ups get caught up in work stuff and lose track of time. But that doesn't mean you're not important. Tyler looked at him with the kind of skeptical wisdom that only children of busy parents possess. "She works every night until late. Sometimes I fall asleep here and wake up at home, but I don't remember her coming to get me." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. The building's overnight cleaning crew had mentioned finding the Morrison kid asleep in the lobby, but Marcus had assumed it was an occasional occurrence, not a regular pattern. The idea that Tyler was being carried home unconscious, never getting that moment of connection with his mother, struck him as profoundly wrong. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself timing his rounds to coincide with Tyler's presence in the lobby. It started innocently enough, checking to make sure the kid was okay, offering granola bars from the vending machine when dinner was forgotten, helping with math homework that seemed absurdly advanced for an 8-year-old. But gradually their interactions became the highlight of Marcus's shift. Tyler was brilliant in the way that only comes from genuine curiosity rather than forced academic pressure. He asked questions about everything. Why the building's elevators moved so quietly, how the security cameras worked, what it was like being a soldier. Marcus found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone since leaving the military, editing out the violence, but keeping the camaraderie and sense of purpose that had defined those years. The boy was hungry for attention in a way that broke Marcus's heart. Not spoiled or demanding, but genuinely grateful for any adult who treated him like a person rather than an obligation. Tyler would save up interesting facts from school to share during their evening conversations, his face lighting up when Marcus showed genuine interest in his thoughts about science or history or the books he was reading. It was during one of these conversations that Marcus learned about Tyler's father. Richard Morrison had died in a car accident when Tyler was 4, leaving Victoria to raise their son while simultaneously running one of the most demanding companies in the tech industry. The weight of that responsibility had gradually consumed her, turning her into the kind of parent who provided everything except presents. "Dad used to read to me every night," Tyler confided one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "He did voices for all the characters. Mom tried for a while after he died, but she always seemed sad when she looked at me. I think I remind her of him too much." Marcus understood that particular kind of pain, the way grief could make love feel dangerous, how protecting yourself from loss could end up creating the very abandonment you feared. Victoria Morrison wasn't a villain. She was a mother drowning in responsibilities and trauma, trying to honor her husband's memory by building the company he'd started while simultaneously struggling to connect with the son who carried his face. But understanding didn't make Tyler's situation any less heartbreaking. The kid spent most of his waking hours either at an elite private school where he was pushed to excel beyond his years, or alone in this corporate lobby waiting for scraps of his mother's attention. His schedule was a testament to good intentions and misguided priorities. Violin lessons, advanced mathematics tutoring, Mandarin classes, tennis instruction, all designed to give him every possible advantage while missing the most basic need for unconditional parental presence. Marcus began to notice other concerning patterns. Tyler's appetite was inconsistent, suggesting irregular meal times. His sleep schedule was chaotic, dependent entirely on when Victoria's meetings ended. The boy had developed a hypervigilance that reminded Marcus of combat veterans, always scanning the room for threats, always ready to make himself smaller and less noticeable. Most troubling were the moments when Tyler would go completely still, his breathing shallow, his eyes unfocused. Marcus recognized the signs of dissociation, a psychological defense mechanism he'd seen in soldiers who'd endured too much stress for too long. An 8-year-old child shouldn't need those kinds of coping mechanisms. The security cameras throughout Morrison Industries captured everything, and Marcus had access to review footage as part of his job responsibilities. What he saw during his off-hours research made his blood run cold. Tyler spent an average of 4 hours alone in the lobby every school night, often until well past midnight. On weekends, he was frequently brought to the office by a nanny who would leave him in a conference room with homework and educational videos while Victoria worked. The boy had learned to navigate the corporate environment with unsettling expertise. He knew which executives to avoid, which cleaning staff were friendly, how to make himself invisible when important meetings were happening. Tyler Morrison was growing up in a world designed for adults, adapting to an environment that had no place for childhood wonder or emotional needs. Marcus started bringing books from home, ones that David had loved at Tyler's age. Adventure stories and fantasy novels that had nothing to do with academic achievement and everything to do with imagination. Tyler devoured them with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been starved for stories that didn't come with comprehension questions and vocabulary lists. They created their own small traditions. Tyler would update Marcus on his reading progress, and Marcus would share carefully edited stories from his military service, focusing on the teamwork and problem-solving aspects rather than the danger. The boy was fascinated by the idea of soldiers working together to accomplish missions, and Marcus found himself describing the brotherhood and mutual support that had sustained him through his darkest moments overseas. But even as their friendship deepened, Marcus was acutely aware of the boundaries of his position. He was night security, invisible to the corporate hierarchy, with no official authority or standing to intervene in Tyler's life. The best he could do was provide a few hours of genuine human connection during the boy's longest, loneliest nights. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus had spent years in special operations protecting strangers in foreign countries, using his skills to save lives and complete missions that served national interests he might never fully understand. Now he was using those same protective instincts to shield one lonely child from the emotional neglect that money and success couldn't solve. Victoria Morrison remained a distant figure glimpsed occasionally through elevator doors or conference room windows. She moved through the building with the purposeful energy of someone carrying enormous responsibilities, surrounded by assistants and executives who competed for her attention. From his security desk, Marcus could see why Tyler felt invisible in her world. There simply wasn't space in her carefully orchestrated corporate life for the messy, time-consuming needs of an 8-year-old boy. Marcus knew he was becoming too invested, crossing professional lines that could cost him his job. But every night, watching Tyler's face light up when their conversation began, he remembered what it felt like to be the most important person in a child's world. For a few hours each evening, he could be the father figure that Tyler desperately needed, even if that relationship existed only within the sterile confines of a corporate lobby. What Marcus didn't know was that his careful attention to Tyler Morrison was about to become a matter of life and death, and that the skills he'd honed in the world's most dangerous places would soon be the only thing standing between an innocent child and unimaginable horror. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, shattering the quiet routine that had defined Marcus's nights for the past 18 months. He was reviewing security footage from the previous evening when his phone rang with an unknown number, the caller ID showing only a Seattle area code. In his line of work, middle-of-the-night calls usually meant false alarms or minor incidents, but something about the timing made his military instincts flare to life. Marcus Chen. His voice carried the crisp professionalism he'd maintained since his Army days, even though his heart was already accelerating toward combat readiness. Mr. Chen, this is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with Seattle PD. I understand you work security at Morrison Industries. The detective's voice was tight, with controlled urgency, the kind of tone Marcus recognized from briefings before dangerous missions. We need you to come to the station immediately. There's been an incident involving Tyler Morrison. The words hit Marcus like incoming artillery. Tyler Morrison. The 8-year-old who'd become the brightest part of his otherwise monotonous nights. The boy who reminded him why protecting innocence mattered more than career advancement or personal recognition. Marcus was already reaching for his jacket before the detective finished speaking. What kind of incident? Marcus kept his voice steady while his mind raced through possibilities. Had Tyler been hurt at home? Was there a medical emergency? The detective's reluctance to provide details over the phone suggested something far worse than an accident. We'll discuss everything when you arrive. Can you be here within the hour? Marcus was in his truck before hanging up the phone, his hands moving with the automatic precision of someone trained to respond to crisis without hesitation. The drive to the Seattle Police Department took him through the empty streets of a city that looked different at 3 in the morning, when the corporate towers stood dark and the only movement came from emergency vehicles and the occasional taxi carrying late-shift workers home. The detective who met him in the lobby was younger than her voice had suggested, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of exhausted determination that Marcus associated with law enforcement officers working cases that kept them awake at night. Detective Rodriguez led him through a maze of cubicles and conference rooms to a small office that smelled like coffee and stress. Mr. Chen, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room until we give you clearance. Do you understand? Rodriguez settled behind her desk, her eyes studying Marcus with the intensity of someone trained to read people under pressure. Marcus nodded, his special operations background having taught him the importance of operational security. Understood. Tyler Morrison was abducted from his school yesterday afternoon at approximately 3:15 p.m. The kidnappers were professionals, Mr. Chen. They knew his schedule, his pickup routine, even which bathroom he used during afternoon break. This was planned with inside knowledge. The words settled over Marcus like ice water. Tyler, the boy who saved up stories to share during their evening conversations, who'd just started reading adventure novels that made him dream of being brave like the heroes in his books, was now living through the kind of nightmare that destroyed innocence forever. Have you made contact with the kidnappers? Marcus's military training kicked in automatically, his mind shifting into tactical assessment mode even as his heart was breaking for Tyler's terror. They called Victoria Morrison 6 hours ago. They're not asking for money, Mr. Chen. They want Morrison Industries' quantum encryption protocols, specifically the military contracts your company developed for the Department of Defense. They've given Ms. Morrison 72 hours to deliver the software, or they'll sell Tyler to human traffickers operating out of Eastern Europe. Marcus felt something cold and lethal settle in his chest. He'd encountered human trafficking networks during his time in special operations, had seen the aftermath of their work and rescued victims who never fully recovered from the trauma. The idea of Tyler Morrison, with his gentle curiosity and trust in adults, being subjected to that kind of horror made Marcus's vision narrow with focused rage. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "I'm just night security." Detective Rodriguez opened a file folder and spread several photographs across her desk. Surveillance images from Morrison Industries showing Marcus and Tyler in the lobby, time-stamped over the past 18 months. The photos captured their evening conversations, Marcus helping with homework, Tyler's face lighting up during their interactions. "Because according to our investigation, you're the closest thing to a father figure that boy has had since his biological father died. Victoria Morrison told us that Tyler talks about you constantly, that you're the only adult in his life who makes him feel safe. We think the kidnappers might try to use that connection." Marcus studied the photographs, seeing their friendship documented in black and white images that somehow captured the genuine affection that had developed between them. In the photos, Tyler looked relaxed and happy in a way that Marcus realized he'd never seen the boy appear around other adults. "Ms. Morrison has agreed to cooperate with our investigation, but she's understandably distraught. The encryption software they're demanding could compromise national security if it falls into the wrong hands. We're dealing with people who clearly have resources and intelligence capabilities that suggest this isn't their first operation." Rodriguez pulled out another set of photographs, these ones showing surveillance footage from around Tyler's school. Marcus recognized the tactical precision immediately, the way the kidnappers had positioned themselves to exploit security gaps, their understanding of timing and surveillance angles. These weren't desperate criminals making impulsive decisions. They were professionals executing a carefully planned operation. "We've traced the phone calls to burner phones purchased with cash. The vehicles used were stolen and abandoned within hours. The pickup location was chosen specifically because it created a blind spot in the school's security cameras. Whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing." Marcus felt his old analytical skills coming online, the part of his mind that had once dissected enemy operations for weaknesses and opportunities. "Have you identified any inside connections?" Someone had to provide detailed intelligence about Tyler's routines. "We're investigating several possibilities. Morrison Industries employs over 3,000 people, and Tyler's schedule was known to dozens of staff members, including teachers, drivers, tutors, and office personnel. We're running background checks, but so far everyone appears clean." The detective paused, her expression shifting to something more personal. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions about your background. We've run your file, and we know about your military service, your special operations training, and your security clearance history." Marcus had been expecting this moment since the conversation began. His past was both an asset and a liability, depending on perspective. "What do you want to know?" "Your psychological evaluation from the Army shows someone with exceptional stress tolerance and tactical decision-making abilities. Your commanding officers described you as someone who could maintain operational focus under extreme pressure, but your discharge papers indicate personal circumstances that led to early separation from service." The familiar weight of that particular failure settled on Marcus's shoulders. "My ex-wife filed for divorce while I was deployed. The custody battle required my presence stateside, and I chose my son over my career. The Army granted compassionate leave that became permanent separation. And now you work night security despite qualifications that could land you positions with private military contractors making 6 figures annually." Marcus met her gaze directly. "After losing custody of my son, I needed work that didn't require security clearances or extensive background investigations. Night security pays the bills and doesn't ask questions about why a former special operations sergeant is willing to work for $12 an hour." Rodriguez nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Chen, we're going to ask something of you that goes far beyond your job description at Morrison Industries. The FBI is taking lead on this investigation, but they're operating under constraints that might not serve Tyler's best interests. Federal protocols prioritize recovering the stolen intelligence and prosecuting the criminals. Rescuing Tyler alive is important, but it's not their primary objective." Marcus felt something dangerous stirring in his chest, the same cold focus that had sustained him through the most lethal operations of his military career. "What are you asking me to do?" "We want you to be our backup plan. If official channels fail, if the kidnappers move Tyler before we can locate him, if the situation deteriorates beyond federal capabilities, We need someone who can operate outside normal parameters. Someone who has the skills to find that boy and bring him home, regardless of official protocols or legal constraints. The request hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Rodriguez was asking Marcus to prepare for an unsanctioned rescue operation, to use his special operations training in a civilian context that could result in criminal charges if things went wrong. She was asking him to risk everything for a child who wasn't his son, but who'd somehow become the most important person in his carefully reconstructed world. Marcus thought about Tyler's face during their last conversation, the way the boy had excitedly described a book about knights who rescued people from terrible fates. Tyler had asked if real heroes existed in the modern world, if there were still people willing to risk everything to protect innocence from evil. "I need to see Victoria Morrison," Marcus said quietly. "If I'm going to put my life on the line for her son, she needs to understand exactly what kind of man she's been walking past for the last 2 years." Detective Rodriguez smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "Mr. Chen, I think that meeting is going to be very educational for everyone involved." Victoria Morrison looked like she'd aged a decade in the 12 hours since her son's disappearance. Her normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled from sleepless hours spent pacing conference rooms and fielding calls from federal agents. When Marcus entered the FBI command center that had been established in Morrison Industries' executive boardroom, her red-rimmed eyes fixed on him with desperate recognition. "You're Marcus," she said, her voice hoarse from crying and stress. "Tyler talks about you constantly. He says you're his friend." Marcus nodded, studying the woman he'd observed from a distance for nearly 2 years. Without her usual armor of corporate confidence, Victoria Morrison looked fragile and human in a way that made his chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. This wasn't the ice-cold CEO who'd walked past his security desk without acknowledgement. This was a terrified mother facing every parent's worst nightmare. "Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand something before we go any further," Marcus said, his voice carrying the steady authority that had once commanded respect in military briefings. "I know your son better than anyone else in this room. I've spent hundreds of hours with Tyler, and I can tell you exactly what he's thinking right now. He's scared, but he's not broken. He's remembering the stories I've told him about soldiers who never give up, about people who come home against impossible odds." Victoria's composure cracked, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the implication that a security guard knew her son's inner world better than she did. "I failed him so completely," she whispered. "I thought providing everything meant I was being a good mother. I thought success would protect him from the world." "Success didn't cause this," Marcus replied firmly. "But your son needs to know that you're fighting for him now with everything you have. The kidnappers chose Tyler because they researched your company and believed they could leverage your maternal instincts against your corporate responsibilities. They're about to discover they miscalculated badly." FBI Special Agent Williams, a stern man in his 50s who'd been running the investigation, looked up from his laptop with barely concealed irritation. "Mr. Chen, while we appreciate your concern for the victim, this is a federal investigation with national security implications. We have protocols and procedures that don't accommodate emotional involvement from civilian personnel." Marcus turned his attention to the agent, his expression shifting to something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Agent Williams, with all due respect, your protocols have resulted in 0 actionable intelligence in 12 hours, while Tyler Morrison is being held by people who specialize in destroying children's lives. Perhaps it's time to consider alternative approaches." The tension in the room was electric, as Victoria Morrison witnessed an exchange that revealed layers of capability and authority she'd never suspected existed in her night security guard. Marcus carried himself differently now, his posture and tone reflecting years of command experience and life-or-death decision-making that had nothing to do with checking doors and monitoring cameras. Detective Rodriguez intervened before the confrontation could escalate. "Agent Williams, Mr. Chen has information about Tyler that could be crucial to understanding the kidnapper's psychological leverage. We need every advantage we can get." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Victoria a video he'd recorded weeks earlier of Tyler explaining his favorite book to Marcus during one of their evening conversations. In the footage, her son was animated and happy, describing adventure stories with the enthusiasm of a child who believed in heroes and happy endings. "This is who your son is when he feels safe," Marcus said quietly. "This is the Tyler I know, and this is the boy I'm going to bring home to you. But I need you to understand that the official investigation is operating under constraints that prioritize intelligence recovery over Tyler's survival. If they locate him in a situation where attempting rescue could result in the kidnappers destroying the encryption software, federal protocols will require them to secure the intelligence first." Victoria's face went white as she grasped the implication. "You're saying they might sacrifice my son to protect computer code?" "I'm saying that as a mother, you need backup plans that put Tyler's life above everything else. The men who took him aren't going to honor their agreement, regardless of whether you deliver the software. Human traffickers don't release witnesses who can identify them. They're planning to take your intelligence and sell your son anyway." Agent Williams stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Mr. Chen, you're interfering with a federal investigation and making accusations without evidence. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus didn't move, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Mrs. Morrison, in approximately 6 hours, I'm going to receive a phone call telling me that federal agencies have identified a probable location for your son. I'll be informed that tactical teams are being positioned for a coordinated assault that prioritizes intelligence recovery. At that point, you'll have a choice to make." Victoria looked between Marcus and Agent Williams, her maternal instincts warring, with years of corporate training that taught her to trust official authorities and established procedures. But something in Marcus's steady confidence, combined with her knowledge of how much Tyler trusted him, made her decision easier than she'd expected. "What choice?" she asked quietly. "You can wait for official channels to determine your son's fate. Or you can authorize me to use methods that guarantee Tyler comes home alive, regardless of what happens to encryption software or federal investigations." Marcus's voice carried absolute certainty, the tone of someone who'd faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. "And if I choose you?" Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the room, an expression that transformed his face from security guard anonymity to something fierce and protective. "Then Tyler Morrison gets to grow up knowing that when evil men tried to steal his childhood, his mother moved heaven and earth to bring him home. He gets to understand that some things are more important than money or corporate success or even national security. He gets to learn that love means being willing to risk everything for the people who matter most." Victoria Morrison looked at the FBI agents, at the detectives, at the corporate lawyers who'd been advising caution and cooperation with federal protocols. Then she looked at Marcus Chen, the man who'd been invisible to her for 2 years but who'd somehow become the most important person in her son's world. "Mr. Chen," she said firmly, "consider yourself authorized to do whatever it takes to bring my son home." Agent Williams's protests were drowned out by the sound of Marcus's phone ringing. He answered with military precision, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up and looked directly at Victoria. "Mrs. Morrison, we just got lucky. The kidnappers made a mistake that's going to cost them everything. Are you ready to discover what a special operations veteran can accomplish when someone threatens a child he's sworn to protect?" The warehouse district at 4:30 a.m. was a graveyard of abandoned industrial dreams, where rusted shipping containers and broken windows created perfect hiding spots for human predators. Marcus moved through the shadows with lethal precision, his special operations training transforming him into something the kidnappers had never encountered before. A father's love weaponized by military expertise. Tyler's terrified voice echoed from inside the corrugated metal building as Marcus positioned himself at the rear entrance. 3 guards, just as he'd calculated. 2 exits, multiple escape routes, and 17 minutes before their scheduled departure to a secondary location where Tyler would disappear forever into the trafficking pipeline. Marcus breached the building like divine retribution, his movements fluid and silent as death itself. The first guard never saw him coming. The second managed to reach for his weapon before Marcus's training ended the threat permanently. By the time the third kidnapper realized they were under attack, Marcus was already cutting Tyler's restraints with hands that didn't shake, despite the violence he'd just unleashed. "Marcus!" Tyler's voice cracked with relief and disbelief. "I knew you'd come. I told them my friend was a real soldier and he'd find me." "I've got you, buddy," Marcus whispered, lifting the boy with arms that had carried wounded soldiers across battlefields. "You're safe now. Your mom's waiting for you." The sirens in the distance meant law enforcement was arriving, but Marcus had already accomplished what federal protocols couldn't guarantee. Tyler Morrison was alive, unharmed, and going home to his mother. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood in the corner office that had once belonged only to Victoria Morrison, his new title of Chief Security Officer barely capturing his actual role in the company's transformation. The night security uniform had been replaced by tailored suits, but more importantly, the invisible barriers between executive floors and human connection had been demolished entirely. Tyler bounded into the office. After school, his backpack hitting the floor as he launched into an animated description of his day. No more waiting alone in marble lobbies. No more anxiety attacks from emotional neglect. Victoria had restructured her entire life around being present for her son, and their relationship had blossomed into something neither had thought possible. "Marcus, guess what? I got an A on my presentation about real heroes," Tyler announced proudly. "I told everyone about how you saved me and how Mom learned that being successful means being there for the people you love." Marcus smiled, watching Victoria ruffle her son's hair with the easy affection that had replaced corporate distance. "What did you say makes someone a real hero?" "Someone who risks everything to protect people who can't protect themselves," Tyler replied without hesitation. "And someone who helps families remember how to love each other." Victoria handed Marcus a check that represented more money than he'd ever imagined possessing, his reward for saving Tyler, but more importantly, for showing both mother and son what genuine connection looked like. The millionaire status was nice, but the real treasure was watching Tyler grow up knowing he was valued, protected, and loved unconditionally. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for seeing what I couldn't see, for being the father Tyler needed when I forgot how to be the mother he deserved." Marcus looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, then at the family he'd helped heal through crisis and courage. Sometimes the most important missions weren't the ones that made headlines or history books. Sometimes they happened in corporate lobbies and warehouse districts, when ordinary people chose to become extraordinary for the sake of love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.